Welcome back to V2K Photography, where we thought the Sony Alpha 9 Mark II was the pinnacle of what Sony is going to offer in mirrorless camera market. Sony surprised us with this, the Sony Alpha 1. This camera can truly handle any kind of photography needs you throw at it. It is a true all-rounder camera that can shoot 30 images per second in 50 megapixel resolution in RAW, HEIF and JPEG formats. The Alpha 1 can record 8K videos internally in 10-bit. The camera shimmers when it comes to dynamic range. It has a stacked full-frame Exmor BSI CMOS sensor with a dual BIONZ XR processor that push this camera to unprecedented limits. Alright, let's talk about the autofocus technologies in this one. Sony cameras have come a really long way when it comes to the eye autofocus and face detection autofocus, so we don't really need to invest much time in checking the eye autofocus and face tracking performances. It is already pretty awesome, and this camera is no slouch. When there are multiple faces in your frame, the camera can detect all the faces with a gray box and track the one that's clearly visible and closest to the camera with a white box. So when you see a white box, that's when the camera's, that's the face the camera's tracking, and the gray boxes are potential trackable faces in the frame. When it comes to bird photography, the camera does fantastic. It tracks the birds even in busy, distracting backgrounds. It has a pretty reliable bird eye autofocus tracking too. However, there's a little bit of room to improve, because when there is a foreground object, the camera tends to miss the subject momentarily, even when the autofocus is locked on. But 95% of the times we get pin-sharp images of the birds properly focused on the eye. That is phenomenal, that is so good, so I don't have much to complain in that area. The autofocus is very strong, even in the high plus modes. That's the mode you can use to shoot 20 frames per second or 30 frames per second in uncompressed RAW and compressed RAW. The autofocus performs the same in both the modes. That is beautiful. That is what we need from a flagship camera. There is a new set of focus modes that you can use to capture your subjects. It's more like a fishing net. You can adjust the size of the boxes that you want, the area of the focus, but it is more like a fishing net. You can catch the subject inside that box and the tracking kicks in, and the tracking won't let go of the subject even when it's outside the box. So it keeps tracking the subject no matter where it is on the frame. That is awesome, and I totally love it. That's the only mode I've been using this camera with. So I've tested with other modes as well, but that particular mode is so reliable. I don't have a need to go to any other focus modes, is what I'm trying to say. So I was shooting this camera with that mode, in that mode, for over 95% of the time. So yeah, that is pretty awesome and pretty reliable, and I totally welcome it. The camera can record uncompressed RAW images 20 times every second, or in other words, you can shoot 20 uncompressed RAW every second. And when it comes to compressed RAW, you can shoot 30 photos a second. That is pretty fast, and the camera has to handle so much data. It has to churn out so much information to your memory card, so the buffer needs to be as deep as possible, and we get around 68 raw images in just one burst, even with a V90 SD card. That is pretty awesome in my opinion. And we bring in the big guns like the CF Express Type A card, we get over 200 raw images in a row. That is brilliant. But the only trouble though is you can't really do much when the buffer is clearing. But until that time, you can't change any settings, you can't preview the images, so you just literally have to wait out until the buffer is completely cleared. I think Sony holds the dynamic range crown now. I was overwhelmed when I saw 6 stops of shadow recovery. That is fabulous. I may not be using 5 stops or 6 stops underexposed images in a wedding scenario, which is my line of work. But if you are into forensic analysis or any investigative kind of work, you could truly appreciate any information that is hidden deep inside the shadows, right? So in that case, the camera truly offers you something to hold on to. I think we should appreciate it. The information is there. Let's appreciate it. Of course, the information is going to be noisy because we are pulling up so much information just by boosting the signal. So don't expect any crystal clear images beyond 3 stops of shadow recovery, but all these images are truly usable for the people who need it. But when it comes to highlight recovery, we get a measly 1.5 stops of highlight recovery. That's okay, I guess, but we still have about 7.5 stops of extra dynamic range that we can distribute along towards highlights or shadows. That is brilliant. Okay, all these are lab tests, right? How good is it in practical scenarios? I was thinking the sky was completely gone, but I could still retain so much information from the sky and also from the woods. So this is the level of dynamic range we're talking about in uncompressed raw images. Let's take a look at the picture profiles we have. We're already so used to the S-Log2, S-Log3, S-Log, HLG and all those picture profiles, but this camera also has the 11th picture profile, which is the S-Cinetone. The S-Cinetone is actually a compressed version of the Cinetone picture profile from the true Venice cameras, the flagship cinema cameras. It's not going to be the 100% accurate colors of the Venice cameras, but it's mostly comparable is what I've read from the internet. Of course, I don't have access to Venice cameras, so I'm just letting you know what the general consensus is. And the skin tones are pleasing straight out of the camera with the S-Cinetone, and with a little bit of tweaking, we also get the same tonal range as S-Log3 with the same dynamic range as well. Just based on my tests, just preliminary tests, Sony could improve the in-body image stabilization. We get around 4.5 stops of IBIS, which is not too bad, but at the same time, it's not up to what the market standard is these days. All right, that was a lot of talking. Let's shift our gears towards video aspects as well. The Sony Alpha 1 can record 8K resolution videos internally in 10-bit with 420 chroma subsampling. Okay, that sounds good, but what's the benefit of it? When you're recording in 8K, if you have distracting foreground subjects, you can crop in. If you are using a 4K timeline, you can still retain a lot of details. If you're using a full HD timeline, so you can keep cropping in like crazy and still retain a lot of information, and the picture would really look awesome even for a full HD timeline. As of now, that is the only major benefit that I can think of for 8K videos, because 8K displays or 8K monitors or 8K computers are not as common as 4K. Even 4K is not that common, but still 8K is like unicorn rare these days. But still, that's the only benefit that I can think of. With great resolution come great distortions. To my surprise, the 8K rolling shutter is handled beautifully. It is not eliminated, but it can be hidden if you follow the pan speeds for every focal length that you are using. So if you're using a 70mm lens, there is a specific pan speed for that. And if you're using a 28mm lens, there is a specific pan speed for that. If you obey that, the rolling shutter is not a problem at all. But if you have fast moving subjects, we will see some level of distortion, but it's not distracting. It is beautifully controlled, is what I'm trying to say. When it comes to 4K recording, we have quite a few codecs to choose from. Honestly, I did not see any perceivable differences in each of these formats. If you have a fast computer, use the XAVC HS format. If data is not a problem for you, if you have a lot of memory space, use the XAVC SI, which will be much easier on your computer, but it'll take a lot of space on your hard drive. So that's the balance that you need to draw based on the hardware that you have. But I did not see much of a difference. I have untrained eyes when it comes to pixel peeping, so I did not see much of a difference, so I think it should be okay. The Alpha 1 can record slow motion in 120 frames per second in 4K resolution, internally in 10-bit 422 as well. This will enable us to slow the footage down by 5 times from the real-time speed. The only thing I noticed that is the autofocus is a little bit slower in 4K 120p recording. In Full HD, we get a whopping 240 frames per second, which can be slowed down to 10% the original speed. The compression is not bad, the quality is pretty good and totally usable. We now have this feature called variable shutter, where you can dial in a specific shutter speed to eliminate the flicker. Heating problems, this is a big one, but don't worry, it is handled wonderfully. The camera feels warm after 10 or 15 minutes of 4K recording, but it stays warm that way. That's it. It doesn't overheat and die on you. It is warm, but it keeps going on and on and on, but it doesn't shut down. I've exhausted a 4K battery. I've exhausted a battery recording 4K, but I did not see the camera shutting down from overheating. So that is a good sign. So the overheating problems are well sorted out in this camera, even with a small body like this. Wonderful, well done. The Sony Alpha 1 is an extraordinary piece of photography equipment money can buy. It can just do any kind of photography in any style of photography. I'd be pretty sad to give this back to Sony India, but that's the way that it is. So long, Alpha 1. Thank you very much for your service. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, bye-bye.